Okay. Thank you. Welcome everyone to Gabbing About Gardening. We have a few moments before we start. Thank you for joining us on this holiday Monday. I didn't realize it was a holiday when I scheduled this, but I have a feeling that whoever is showing up is definitely meant to be here. I have been a fan of Michael Ableman, our guest teacher today, ever since I learned about the work that you were doing in the area of urban farming and gardening. And when I read your book, Street Farm, which I love, and I knew that at some point after I started the Gabbing About Gardening project that I would want to invite you, Michael. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, all of you folks who are joining us. More will be joining, I'm sure. I'm your host of Gabbing About Gardening. And Gabbing About Gardening is a free gathering for gardeners that I initiated. Hi, Esther, welcome. That I initiated when COVID hit and we could not gather together. And I realized how much we missed sharing ideas, sharing inspiration. So Gabbing About Gardening is founded on the principles of sharing information. It's also based on the principles of the gift economy. And we hope that you receive a gift today with the teaching and the stories, the visuals that Michael Ableman will present today. And we welcome you to gift back to Gabbing About Gardening, and your money goes for the technological expenses. It goes towards paying our guest teacher of the week. Today, that's Michael Ableman. And it also goes to support free garden schools and permaculture education programs around the world. We sponsor Morag Gamble's Perma Youth program in the Kenyan refugee settlement she has established, which is changing lives and feeding people in the refugee settlement. And my heart is just full every time I visit Morag Gamble's website, because she has videos of these young people who are gardening, growing food, learning to grow food, and using the principles of permaculture to do it. So that's where your donations go. And we really appreciate anything that you share with us. I will be posting in the chat how you can contribute to Gabbing About Gardening. So Michael Ableman has become a hero of mine. I really have been inspired and appreciative of the work that Michael is doing to encourage people to grow their own food wherever they are. And Michael is working on a new book called Gabbing About Growing Good, called Growing Good Grub. The title of today is Gabbing About Growing Good Grub. And I know I'm premature in maybe sharing some of that. I hope that's okay with you, Michael. Michael is an award-winning photographer, an author, an organic farmer. He has a farm on Salt Spring Island, a family man, a teacher, a motivator, an inspirationalist, and today you're showing up as my hero. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. And I'm going to turn this all over to you to introduce yourself and share what you'd like to share with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure. I see some of you, but I am new. I am a newbie to the Zoom culture. So I hope all this works. My plan for today is to lean heavily on Q&A and conversation. But I will start off by kind of presenting a visual diary, if you will, of some of the work that I've done as an organic farmer and as a community activist over the years in visual terms, so you can kind of see what's happening, and I'll narrate that process. And should I go ahead or should we wait for some of these other people to? I think I should go ahead. Now I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope all this works. Let's see. Oh, good. Yeah, great. So we're going to start with, and hang on to your questions, because at the end of my visual presentation, I will rely on you to kind of guide the conversation, because I have no idea who you are, where you come from, what your experience is, what you know about food and agriculture and gardening. So I'll leave it to you to kind of drive the conversation.
That sounds great.
Aside from a long stint at an agrarian commune in California for many years, that my next experience was 25 years on a small farm in coastal California called Fairview Gardens. This is what it looked like in 1954, which I should say, to provide some context, was the year that I was born. That little red square. So in 1954, that farm was a farm surrounded by other farms. The roadway you see here is Highway 101. It was a little two-laner in those days. Now it's a major highway. And this is the Goleta Valley of California, one of the richest farming areas in the world, Mediterranean climate, so you can grow everything, and some 30 feet of topsoil. Now, this is what it looked like in 1954, and see if you notice a difference here. Whoop, why is that not changing? Okay, oh, let's see. These should change. There we go. And that's 1998. You notice a difference in the valley? Yeah.
Yes.
So by 1998, most of that wonderful, rich farmland had been paved over and developed. In fact, all the remaining green spaces are now gone. So 30 feet of topsoil paved over. A friend of mine gives me some consolation by suggesting that by paving over our precious topsoil, we are preserving it for future generations. That is, he is joking. For those of you we're not in the same room, so I'm not sure how these statements come off. Oh, why can't I trigger the slides? This is very strange. Something, oh, there we go, that'll work. Okay, so this is that 12.5 acres produced 100 different fruits and vegetables, employed 30 people, fed 500 families, and in its heyday generated close to $1 million in gross income. And that was, I left there, I've been gone for over 20 years, So quite a productive little spot. That was our retail store on one of the main roads with a succession of sweet corn. That's on the right side is my son, Aaron, who is now 38 years old with his own daughter, gorging on Royal Blenheim apricots. Royal Blenheim apricot is in the slow food arc of taste. It is a preserved variety. There is nothing like it. It is an incredible, and so there's Aaron eating apricots. We grew 40,000 pounds of peaches every year on that property. A wonderful crop. And we did something that is probably less unusual now than it was then. In those days, and to some degree today, an orchard is an orchard and a field of row crops is a field of row crops, and never did the two meet. We grew row crops down the alleys of the trees, and we did a lot of experimentation as to how that can work. made a lot of interesting discoveries. And the importance of that practice was to maximize and intensify the production off a very small acreage. 12.5 acres producing, as I said, the staggering amount of food annually was done through a lot of creative techniques. It was also a time when if you spoke to anyone in agricultural economics or in farming and suggested that you could support 30 people on that small an acreage, they would have thought you were crazy, but we did it and we did it successfully. These are mandarin oranges, clementine oranges in particular, an Algerian variety, wonderful seedless variety. I'm sure that most of you are growing these in your backyard here in BC, is that right? Yeah. And you can see the neighborhood grew up around us. You can see the suburban tract homes that built up around us, to the point where at one point in our process there, several things happened. I was threatened with jail time over the crow of our roosters. We were, challenged about the signs advertising the fresh produce. We had a lot of challenges to actually survive there. The new suburban and urban neighbors did not understand or were not sensitive to the particularities of living next to a farm, So Tom Cole, who is now, was an intern in those days teaching a class. We would have thousands of kids every year come in school buses to learn about where their food came from, which is a bit of a cliche, but they did. Tom is now one of the best known people in alternative agricultural development throughout Africa. He works for Save the Children and a bunch of other organizations, and he started with us as an intern. He's become very successful. This is some of the orchard with the loaves of mulch that we used to get that used to head for the landfill. You can see those in the foreground. Potato field, I can't remember what else. These images are very old, I should tell you. I've been gone from there for 20 years or so. And a jacaranda tree in the foreground, another thing we probably can't grow here. Oh, and then moving forward, this is where we are now today. This is Foxglove Farm on Salt Spring Island. It is a 120-acre farm. One of the original homesteads on the island. It is up at 1,200 feet on Mount Maxwell. And we have spent the last 14 or 15 years developing this farm. This is one corner of it, if you can believe that, from the air. You can see the diversity. The original log house built at the turn of the century. This was our first year of cropping on that one of the fields. Just some other fields in production. Turning hay on one of our upper fields where we grow grain and hay. That's me, believe it or not. The beard is a new thing. And a lot of intensive production. Are you able to hear me okay? And visually it's working? Yep, okay, yep.
Yeah, it's great, Michael.
Okay, we grow a lot of strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, French melons, sweet corn, tomatoes, peppers, the whole range of things. Globe artichokes, you see the little tree frog there, okay? Now this is a system of farming that we use, and we can talk about this more, that encourages biodiversity, not just crop diversity, but biodiversity. There is a relationship between those two things. And this is not necessarily the philosophy of most production farms and most farms that produce the food that many people are still relying on. So we can talk about what does it mean? How does one create the conditions in the environment to support tree frogs, for example, living in our artichokes. This is a image of one of our summer produce stands. This is a very old photograph. Our displays are now about 6 feet tall instead of 2 feet tall. We've changed our system, but it gives you an idea of the diversity of our production, right? Okay. We used to do a series of workshops through a workshop series called through the Center for Arts, Ecology, and Agriculture that we started on the farm. This is Elliot Coleman, who's well known in the farming world, teaching his 4-season harvest workshop. We've had a lot of the real visionaries in the field come and teach there. We no longer do these workshops anymore. We did a kids farm arts and culinary camp every summer for 30 years, actually. So in the mornings they do farm stuff. With a chef, they prepare their own lunch from foods they have grown and harvested. In the afternoon, they do an arts interpretation. And at the last day of the last camp that we did, they took an 8-foot table and put a 2-inch layer of squash puree down and built a vegetable forest from products they had harvested. Isn't that beautiful? I love that. One of our hay and grain fields, okay? The old barn with asparagus in fern in the foreground, that barn is no longer there. It collapsed on Mother's Day 3 years ago. And one of our former interns, Kelsey, expressing her independence. And then I'm gonna just show you, I spent about 10 winters throughout the 1980s when I was not farming, my winter breaks from farming, traveling around the world, trying to understand how first traditional cultures had fed themselves over many generations, how certain cultures had been farming successfully for thousands of years, and how in our part of the world we don't seem to, we're very new to it, and that there is land we deplete in less than 10 years, okay? This, for example, is China, a photograph taken in 1984. Highly intensive agricultural system, the oldest agricultural system in the world, growing on, at that time, only about 11% of its land base, but supporting 1 billion people through farming techniques and methods that were passed down from the Han Dynasty, So there's a lot we can learn from that. So I spent 10 winters traveling through 5 different continents, creating my first book, which came out in 1993. This is the Peruvian Andes. These are terraces that were made by the Inca 500 years ago. And I walked those terraces. I did not see any erosion. It's the engineering is brilliant. And then in Sicily, where there are more rocks than grains of soil, but this is a place that at one time was the breadbasket of Europe, no longer. Again, in China, this incredibly complex, intensive system of multi-cropping, where you see currently on these fields, there are lettuce, but intercropped with a successive crop under those clay pots. When the lettuce is harvested, the pots are pulled off and a replacement crop is already growing. The waterways surrounding the plantings are growing algae to feed the ducks, So it's a highly integrated, highly sophisticated system. In Peru, again in China, fields that I witnessed multi-generations farming land that had not just been farmed by their parents or grandparents, but like I said, all the way back for some 7,000 years. Very impressive. In northern Thailand, amongst the Karen tribesmen, a bean harvest. And my good friends in the Hopi villages on Third Mesa, Haute-Villa, who I used to spend quite a bit of time with when I was living in the States, who have an incredible tradition. These are people who have lived on these lands for 5,000 years. This is one of the most inhospitable places to grow food anywhere on the planet, not just in North America. And yet you walk out into the middle of the desert, no pipes, no irrigation, but you encounter these lush fields with corn, beans, squash, melons, and pretty amazing. So I spent a number of years visiting these folks to try to understand this tradition. In China, again, on the outskirts of the city of Shaman. And in Africa, where at the time when I was traveling there, it was the women that did most of the farming. The men were watching the animals. This is traditionally a pastoralist society, but that has adopted some agricultural techniques. Am I going too fast, or is this okay? Yeah. Tea plantation. This is a crop that, amongst many, a commodity crop, providing substandard employment to local people, using the best land, forcing subsistence to take place on the most marginal lands, and the entire crop exported, nothing that supports people in that area. Samburu tribesmen in northern Kenya. And watering onions in China, again, incredible to have watched. I sat and watched this for 2 hours. They watered an entire acre and a half of onions, 2 people. It was like a well choreographed dance, beautifully done, very efficient. Filling the buckets from the well and walking through the fields. Kiwicha, a amaranth grown in Peru. At the time I was there, quinoa and kiwicha and many of the amaranth plants were dying off because of the incredible amount of labor that's required to process these grains. But this is a grain that has 17% protein, greater than milk. I think it's coming back there a bit, but it was replaced by other crops at the time. In Sicily, harvesting and hauling hay, again in Sicily, and a farmer's lunch. And then again in northern Kenya.
Michael,
Yes, who's that?
Michael, we actually are getting a few requests to see if you could slow down a little. I think people are having a little bit of connectivity problems.
Okay, well, we're coming.
I'm not.
It should be easy.
You're coming through. Okay, okay.
We've got just a few more. So when I finished and working on that first book, I finished the exploration into our traditional roots. Where did we come from agriculturally and culturally? And I realized that the context of that needed to be placed on what was currently happening. And so I began to record the impacts of a relatively short-lived system of agriculture, which really came out of World War I and World War II. Our current system of industrial agriculture, which has only existed for relative to what was happening in China, a 7,000-year tradition. This has only been going on for far less than 100 years. These are celery fields near where I used to farm in California, being sprayed with fungicide for late blight. Okay, not something when you see this done and it's done every 10 days, it does not encourage you to eat commercial celery. I can tell you that. This is alfalfa being grown in the Owens Valley, one of the driest places on the planet. The water, the alfalfa, by the way, is one of the most thirsty crops that we have. Water being pumped from 700 feet down under to water these crop circles of alfalfa. Hay being shipped 1,000 miles away to feed animals, an incredibly inefficient system. This is the largest feedlot on the planet, the Simplot feedlot in northern Idaho, which I snuck into on a Sunday, and spent the day with the cows. Is that slower, a little better? Yep, okay. Back to the celery field. Okay, this image has been used extensively by companies like Patagonia and stuff to kind of emblematic image of what we're up against. And the farm workers, which are the foundational support of the system, who in the US risk their lives to cross the border that is guarded to keep out the very people who are growing the basic nourishment. Living a life of anonymity, doing work that Americans will no longer do. So this is a problem. It's true in Canada as well, except that in Canada we have I think, a relatively wonderful program that actually is should be the model of the Americans, but it's not. A pesticide shop in Peru, where I literally witnessed people coming in and to buy pesticides in bulk, and they would taste for strength, you know. And this was what's going on there? This is the Coachella Valley in Southern California growing romaine lettuce. Not a particularly precision way to be applying nitrate fertilizer, but he's pouring that into the furrows. These are furrow irrigated fields, which I'm sure no longer exist, but it was being done not that long ago. And again, farm workers out in a field, a lettuce field in the Salinas area. This is in the Netherlands. This is the result of heavy nitrate use on our industrial farms. Incredibly damaging. The algae bloom is just dramatic, and its impact on our waterways is also dramatic. Yeah, this is the Delta area in California. You can see how much dust and erosion is being kicked up. And Central Valley, the breadbasket of, still to this day, more than 40% of the fruits and vegetables used in North America come from the San Joaquin, or the Central Valley as we know it. This is post-harvest after a cotton harvest. That does not look like anything that you would want to try to grow food into, but there it is. That's the result of these practices, you know. And then the way forward, the book ended with the way forward. This is my friend Richard Harder, who passed away, I think probably 10 or 15 years ago, sitting on top of his rice bin, overlooking his fields. Richard believed that that it was as important to support, that his rice production supported bird life as it did grains of rice. And his fields were the result of that. They were an incredibly dynamic, biodiverse habitat. And there are a lot of rice growers, in fact, in the northern Sacramento area that have adopted these practices and using rice fields to actually enhance biodiversity. It's brilliant. Yeah, this is in northern Washington. Hilario Alvarez, his pepper fields. There's Hilario and his family. This is a man who originally crossed the border illegally. He now owns his own farm, employs over 100 people, and has an incredibly diverse, successful operation. This is on my farm in California many years ago, picking peaches. And of course, this broom was stored right next to the corral where this bull lived, and it was customary that if you were going to walk that way, you had to stop and offer a scratch, you know. So. Okay. Northern Philadelphia, wonderful dynamic urban gardens. And in New York, you can tell these are how dated these images are. These were all made in the 1980s by the clothing that people are wearing. This is outside of Paris. This is Louis Savier, who supported 2 families on, I believe it was like a 1/4 acre of land through some just remarkable traditional French intensive methods. This was very common at a certain point in France and in Paris, and quite a number of years ago. But he's continued those methods. He has a rail system. So instead of taking up valuable space for roads, he moves product and materials around on these mini rail cars. These are little cold frames that he's built. Brilliant system. Joel Salatin, a friend of mine in Northern Virginia, who's really done great work on really rethinking how we raise livestock. And a cheese producer, sheep cheese producers in Wisconsin, who built their own caves and produced unbelievable cheese. This is a Black Farmers Cooperative in Northern Illinois. I spent a week there. And my friend Richard DeWild in Wisconsin, a true master I mean, you look at those fields, if your eye is informed well enough, you will know that there is a certain level of craftsmanship and artistry that is very difficult to achieve. And this guy has it. He's a brilliant farmer. You know that. How do you know that? You know that by the color and the tenor of those plants, how they're standing, what their color is, how tall they are. I mean, these are, you can learn to read fields and read plants like you read another human or read a book. And we can talk about that. Earl Ransom, a friend of mine, was a wonderful dairy farmer in northern Vermont, who produces the best ice cream. That's their primary thing. They make incredible ice cream from Guernsey cows. Okay, and this is a yeah. Well, I don't need to say anything about that. Wonderful seed collection there. My favorite squash, Marina di Chioggia, which are featured as almost like living sculptures in our house all winter long. We have hundreds of them that are stored in the house, and beautiful to watch them throughout the winter and to eat them and share them. Some cabbage, bees. Can you see those? Yep. Elliot Coleman in his fields. And my friend LaDonna Redmond in northern Chicago in a wonderful urban agriculture project there. And there you have it. That's, oh no, soul food. You want to see soul food also? Or you want to talk? How much time do we have left?
Show us soul food, Michael, because
Okay.
yeah, we got to see that. I mean, what I love about what you're doing is we get to see this really wide scope of your photography. Michael has taken all of these pictures, these photographs himself, and he's lived this experience. So yeah, can you run through soul food?
Yeah, I will. I'll do this. I'm sorry, but I'll do it fairly quickly because the intent was to have time with you to talk to you. So
we have lots of, hey, Michael, we have lots of time. We have until 5. And I think what people get really jazzed about is for you to take a lot of time and tell a story with photos as it comes up for you.
Okay, I'll do it. So I'm assuming that most people on this call are BC residents. Is that correct? Maybe not. Okay, well, if you are a BC resident, you probably know a little bit about the downtown east side of Vancouver. This is the downtown east side of Vancouver. If you're not familiar with it, it is about a 15 square block area, almost entirely inhabited by folks who are managing poverty, drug addiction, and mental illness issues. And about 14 years ago, I co-founded a project on the downtown east side called Soul Food Street Farms. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about that. But here's a little bit of the context. This is the neighborhood, okay? This is not an unusual thing. This is a common sight, okay? I don't really need to give you much narration on some of these. Okay.
But you know what's so amazing, Michael, is just the juxtapositioning of the beautiful photographs and the gardeners and the people and the natural environment versus this that you came into, and then, well, you'll tell that story.
So this is right across from one of our farm sites, or former farm site, I should say. Oh, what happened? Oh, okay. Well, we're going to jump around a bit, but that's okay. This is this is actually where I started in the urban agriculture. I don't know what happened here, but that's okay. It fits. The first project of this scale I started in Watts back in the 1980s. Now, Watts is a neighborhood that makes the downtown east side look like Beverly Hills. A place of great extremes, highest infant mortality rates, highest poverty, unemployment, and highest violent crime rates, possibly anywhere in North America. This is the site. This was 3 acres next to the Watts Health Clinic, which was burned down during the uprisings in the 1960s. And we came in, this is what it looked like. We hauled out, I don't know, thousands of pounds of trash, rubble, dead animals, needles, you name it, cleaned the site up, brought in our tractors and created beds and composted. This was the first day of planting with some neighborhood kids. And this is what it looked like soon after. You notice the difference? Yeah, this is what you can create from nothing. But what's more important is the impact these projects have on the community. And this is my favorite photograph because this is the kids going home with, excuse me just a second. These are the kids going home with carrots that were just harvested. And it would be, I would love to have actually, been present in one of those bunches of carrots to have experienced the response, because, this is a neighborhood where there are no food stores, that the only place to get anything that resembles food is at the liquor store or the, so coming home with bunches of carrots that were just harvested was So back to soul food. That gives you some indication of where I started in all this. I took that knowledge. There was that project was, I don't know about success, but we were challenged in that neighborhood, and I decided I needed to break from that. And so fast forward about 15 years, and I started Soul Food with a much more grounded approach. This is the original site next to the Astoria Hotel in Vancouver where we started. This was the first year. This is Donna, who was with us for 4 or 5 years, who said, "What's the use of being sober if you don't do anything with your sobriety?" I love that quote. We grew strawberries in vertical pipes that we drilled out in order to maximize the space. We used vertical space. This is Kenny, our first and original neighborhood farmer, who's still working with us after all these years. And this is when we began to expand. This is on Concord Pacific land. This is the beginnings of our expansion when we were building one of our newer sites. There were at one time were 5 sites. And that's what it looked like after they were planted, the same location. And I should tell you that if you look at that image and you aren't able to recognize it, this is a pretty sophisticated, farming systems. These are not, I do need to say, just to get the terminology clarified, our crew at Soul Food, if you refer to them as gardeners or the farms as gardens, they take great offense to that. And it's not a value judgment of gardening at all. It's about the fact that when you're out there in the middle of acres of food production and, you're loading up truckloads to go to restaurants and stores and farmers markets, you don't exactly think of yourself as a gardener. And there is an important distinction there. And I respect that in our staff. So we do take umbrage when these farms are referred to as gardens. We're producing 25, now it's actually 30 plus tons of food annually on these sites. That's 60,000 pounds. And when that's greens, that's a lot of volume. So that gives you some indication of how much is coming out of there. This is Cam. This is another location where we set up 14,000 square feet of high tunnel houses, unheated high tunnel houses. This is when we were building them. This is when they were covered, you see, and that's inside those tunnel houses the first year of planting, okay? That's tomatoes and eggplants. Okay, I'm gonna move through these a little bit more now. You kind of get the idea. That's 7. Now this is the site of the orchard before we developed it. We now have a urban orchard planted in huge boxes. And this is what it looked like when we started. This is the kind of stuff we had to remove. Daily chore is picking up needles. And that's me planting the first tree in that orchard. Those trees are now, some of them 25 feet tall, and you know, it looks very different. Oh, this gives you an idea. This is about the third year of that orchard. Now we're actually growing things like persimmons, which nobody thought was possible, but we have reliable crops annually. Shiro plums. There's the orchard from the air. This is what my pet, the setting up the orchard was really one of the things that I was most proud of. Now, all these sites have now had to move. We've consolidated to one location. This is our market stand for soul food on Main Street in Vancouver, in front of the train station. And some chefs who come down to pick up their food, or did. Another chef, Nova, who still works with us. Alan, who still works with us after many, many years, amazing person. There's Alan and Lissa. Kenny, leveling beds, a little look from the air. Okay, can you see that, everybody? Yeah. Mike Devine, our night watchman. Kenny. Lyle. Jesus, who is no longer with us, died a year ago on New Year's Day on the downtown east side. Miranda. And there you go. Okay, stop sharing. I'm not sharing anymore. Okay.
Wow, just magnificent, Michael. Thank you so much. Let's open things up. You can either unmute or type your comment or question in the chat box, and I can read it to Michael. Michael, you know, I love the way you started with the pictures from all around the world, showing how people have been traditionally farming, and then some of the impacts that methods have taken on the soil. When I look at that, I really wonder, what is the common factor that you have seen as the best practices in your travels? Are there a couple of things that you could tell us about that are kind of universal good ideas for farmers and gardeners?
Sure, that's like the most common question that I get, but it's a good one. It's a very good question. And I'll just say, you know, the best fertilizer is the farmer's footsteps on the field. It's, you know, we have this idea that somehow you have to learn all these you know, in-depth and complex techniques to farm or garden. Really what you have to learn is observation, and that is a real skill. The best way to learn to farm or garden is to be there every day, continuously, and to observe carefully, and to really train your eye and your sense of observation to notice the day-by-day changes, the month-by-month changes, the response that happens from the actions that you apply, and what those actions create, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. Learning to, rather than viewing yourself as some sort of god over your garden, or in our case, like a general standing out in their fields, you know, doing battle on their farm, which is the kind of the traditional attitude of industrial agriculture. You learn better to learn how to move into the what I call the slipstream of your farms, the biological slipstream. Where do you fit in as a part of, rather than the ruler of, you know, as a member of, a participant, right? So this is important, and it sounds very philosophical, but it's got a reality base, because I'm actually extremely pragmatic person. And I have a very low tolerance for, there's a lot of talk these days, a lot of people out there talking about food and farming, and and not a lot of equivalent level of real on the ground experience. And you know, I've been at this for I'm 67. I've been doing this for 46 or 7 years. I don't know. I can't keep track. And so my patience for the jabbering is pretty limited. But so what I say is, forget about everything you've learned in gardening books or even in Lucretia's wonderful sessions, and I know they're inspiring. You have to find your own way, and to find your own way, because your garden and your location, whether it's a backyard or a front yard or a 120-acre farm, is unique. It is unique. It is totally different than what happens in with your neighbors. So understand and learn to have a relationship with that place, and you will know what it needs from you, okay? And that means you're out there every day looking and watching and paying attention. I do basically my job is walking every morning. You know, I have to walk around, look at everything all the time, every day. And the plants and the animals tell you what they need. I don't hear voices, but they tell you exactly what they need. And I think that this is, in relationship to your question, which I'm circling back to, this is the fundamental thread that is ties us back to 7,000 years of tradition of this. This is the piece that I think those who are, you know, who can claim any kind of success, and I that's the wrong word, in the work they do on their farms or gardens, they will have to admit that they're just good listeners, they're good observers, that observation is the most important horticultural or agricultural skill. Nothing else is more important. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you,
Anybody else?
Michael.
Questions from the group?
You folks can just unmute and ask. A couple people have written questions in as well. Let me just ask you, those people can unmute as well, Michael. Robin wants to know about the growing in boxes. Robin, are you with us? Do you want to just ask your own question here? Okay.
Well, I was very curious about those boxes in the city. First off, I didn't recognize them as boxes, and then I saw. Then you went from a small box to these great big tubs that you were filling with soil. So that's kind of answered my question. But I also wanted to know, where did you get all the soil, and how did you feed the soil over the years?
Okay, good question. So every urban area, everywhere in the world, shares the same challenge from the perspective of growing food safely. Okay, you can grow it, but it's questionable as to how safe it is. And that challenge is that most urban soils everywhere are contaminated. Okay, it's very rare that they're not. There are some exceptions, but very few. So to responsibly grow food in the city, especially on the level we're doing, where we're producing, you know, 25, 30 plus tons of food for the community, to be responsible, we cannot grow in native soils. That's impossible. And in addition to that, we have a lot of the access to land in the city is very difficult, especially on the scale we're operating. So we have to use things like parking lots, right? Pretty hard to grow food in pavement. So we designed these boxes to address a couple different issues. One, contaminated soil and pavement. And the other is that we have to often move on short notice. And if you notice, those boxes are designed with forklift tabs so they can be moved. They isolate the growing medium either from pavement or contaminated soil. And we can move on short notice, okay? So they are filled with soil that we had made an arrangement with a company that actually no longer exists, that used to exist in Richmond, that was producing soil from Vancouver's waste, but not any waste, targeted waste. In other words, not contaminated yard waste. And they sold us, you know, thousands of tons of soil, which we used to fill those boxes. So our responsibility beyond that stage is to maintain the fertility. And I can tell you, when you isolate the growing medium from a garden or normal garden or open field agriculture space, where it no longer has access to all the complexity of interactions that go on in a normal garden or farm, you have a big challenge. And we found that we've had to really develop some strategies and techniques to maintain not just soil fertility, that's easy, but soil biology, which is even more important. And so that's required a lot of attention to things like compost tea and compost and worm castings and such. And I'll leave it at that, because I can talk about that. We could spend the rest of the time just talking about that, and perhaps we should. But I think Esther has her hand. Esther, your hand is up there with a blue light around it. How do you do that?
From the participants box, you can do, there's a little thing
I
that,
know, I'm playing.
okay. Yeah, hit participants and then, everybody's name comes up.
Okay.
You'll find it. But I'm curious about water. I mean, I live in Oregon, and the Willamette Valley, where there's a lot of farmers digging deep and pumping gallons and gallons and gallons of water to water their grass seed every day. And I think that if we continue watering at that rate, we're going to deplete our fresh water too soon. And do you have any suggestions or ideas how to manage our water better?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, 80% of fresh water goes to agriculture, of which only a tiny fraction ever actually makes it to the intended plants or animals, something like 20%, due to extremely inefficient transportation and application methods. I mean, if you've been into, well, even in the Willamette Valley or into parts of California or in the Fraser Valley of BC, you can go out there in the middle of the summer. It's super hot. The sun is blasting and there are sprinklers going. What's happening when that's going on? Most of that water is evaporating, okay, before it even hits the ground. So, I showed you pictures of those Hopi fields, or I touched on that. I was fascinated by the Hopi because the Hopi chose to settle to one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. And they did so somewhat intentionally, and they have been able to, less so obviously in the last 50, 75 years, to support their communities, those villages, through growing on that land. And they've done so by selecting crop varieties and seeds, and by developing planting techniques that allowed them to grow in extremely dry conditions. Planting deep, that corn, when they plant very deep and they plant multiple seeds. You saw that corn, it was clusters, That's also a variety that has evolved for thousands of years, okay, in those conditions. Watermelons, beautiful watermelons out there. They grow without any water, dry beans. We grow our tomatoes, for example, we dry farm all our tomatoes, And, I'm working on this book, which is probably years away, which is really a kind of a farmer's advice to gardeners, if you will, on how to increase flavor and work a garden better within the constraints of whatever your environment is. And one of the beautiful things about reducing water on tomatoes, as an example, is that you increase the flavor of those tomatoes. And you can grow tomatoes without a drop of water, and you reduce the disease pressure and you increase the flavor dramatically because it accentuates and concentrates the sugars in that fruit, But to do that requires some technique and a little bit of this and that, and some simple ideas that some of us have evolved just by having to over the years. I think that we all have a responsibility to look at things like water and to find out ways to you know, as for example, as it moves across your garden or your farm, to keep it there longer, allow it to move slowly, to settle in, okay? Soils should be not sieves, but sponges. And that's your responsibility as a gardener, to create the conditions where those soils are sponges, not sieves. There's a difference, okay? And to know that when the water leaves your land, it leaves in better condition than when it arrived. This is a responsibility we all have, okay? And so, you know, I think farmers and gardeners play a big role in this. And we can do it. This is not a sacrifice. This is, you know, tomatoes are a great example. This increases the pleasure of our experience. I'll leave it there. I don't know if I even answered your question, but I tried. Anybody else?
I have a question about your term dry farm tomatoes. Can you say a little something about that?
Yeah, let me turn the light back on since I just slammed the, here, hang on. Oh, no, it's gone. Can you still see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, I don't know what I did, but something happened. Yeah. So yeah, dry farming is, it's really an ancient technique that I used or was introduced to in California. California is basically an arid place. It's a desert that has been coaxed to become this breadbasket. And most of those farms in the Central Valley of California that produce the majority of the food that's still consumed by most people are using water incredibly inefficiently. It's really, it travels through open viaducts, incredible evaporation goes on. It's the insane amount of irrigation water that is used on the Central Valley farms has created a nightmare situation where you saw that picture of the salts and minerals that build up on the soil, the surface of the soil, and has made millions of acres of Central Valley farmland unusable, not just for farming, but for anything. They're toxic as a result. So dry farming is a technique that was developed by people like traditional peoples, indigenous peoples like the Hopi, where to allow us to grow basic foodstuffs without any water at all. And I found this wonderful film from the 1930s of the valley that I farmed, the Goleta Valley where I farmed in California. I showed you pictures of it, where they were growing and planting a tomato field. The plants looked like trees, like a tree planting project, very tall plants, and they'd bury them in the ground with just a little bit sticking out of the ground. And never did they get water. And the only thing that was done commonly in dry farming is what we call dust mulching. So they would either with a tractor or by hand throw a little bit of soil on top of the soil on the plants, which is essentially mulches the soil itself with soil, and allow those plants to rely on searching out subsurface moisture. Tomatoes in particular are a great example because all along their stem, they will produce little rootlets if allowed to. So if you give them more rooting zone, then they have the capacity to survive more difficult situations and to find more moisture, you know, so that's one example. But I also have grown melons, dry farm melons. That's not uncommon. Beans are wonderful as a dry farm crop. There's many things you can do under marginal conditions. Varietal selection is important, you know, what cultivar you use, but it's a lot of very specific technique. You know.
Thank you. First time I've heard of it, and it's very intriguing. I'm really interested. Lucette had a question. Lucette, would you like to unmute and ask Michael your question?
Sure, Michael, it's just about critters getting into your produce.
I can't see you, Lucette.
Yeah, I have little things eating all sorts of things in my garden. So how do you keep those out?
Yeah, well, that's also a very common question and has been for years. When people would find out I was an organic farmer, the first thing they want to know is, well, what do you do about the pests? And my response was always shocking. as it will be to you, I'm sure, which is not much. I mean, when you build the right foundation, when you create the conditions that are what we call, to create what we call plant positive conditions, okay? Where plants can thrive and have everything they need, okay? Then everything else that follows is easy. And I'll just give you an example. Lucette, you may be, and I'm sure you are an exceptional person, but I'm guessing that if for the next 3 weeks to 4 weeks, you did nothing but stay up all night and drink Coke and eat potato chips, I'm guessing, unless your constitution is stronger than mine, at the end of that time, you're going to start to feel kind of sick. And you're going to make yourself susceptible to all kinds of potential issues, right? Plants are not that different. You know, it's well proven now and well researched that when plants are under stress, like us, they are sending out signals. And I have watched this time and time again that attract insects. And here's an example. And when I used to have interns, this was one of the great examples of this question. Kale. Everybody grows kale, okay? So kale in the spring, in the early spring, when it's cool and wet, you plant it. It looks beautiful. It's dynamic, assuming it has a reasonable amount of fertility. It is developing beautifully. If you leave it in, because it'll keep growing, through the summer, what happens? As the weather dries up and gets hot, and you watch kale, the leaves get smaller, they get uglier, and then before you know it, the aphids arrive. Now, why is that happening? That's happening because that plant does not like the conditions that it is now in. Now, at my farm, when I had interns, they go, well, aren't you going to do anything about that? And I go, no. Those same plants would be left covered with aphids, looking awful. And I did nothing. Cruel, huh? Not really, because come fall, when the nights get colder and the mornings, the dew point rises and the days get wetter, what happens? Those aphids magically disappear. I have done nothing. And the plant grows out into these, once again, beautiful, lush, dynamic, dark green, turbid leaves. Turgid, sorry, is the word, not turbid, turgid leaves, you know. So what I'm saying is these conditions, you want to create the conditions that are plant positive, that support the plant. And the first way you do that is through highly dynamic soil, healthy soil. It's just about soil. That's the foundation, primary foundation. You grow the plants at the time of the year in the conditions that they love the best. You know your plants, so you know where they came from, okay? Where did they come from? What are the conditions like in the places where they originated? That's important. Every plant has a story, just like every human. Get to know the story, you'll do a better job growing it, okay? And you know, aside from some exclusion of the larger pests like deer, which we fence out, we have miles of fence on our farm, deer fence, or keeping the ants out of the perennial crops like the orchards by tanglefoot, you know, just a little bit of tape and tanglefoot, which is exclusion. Why do I want to keep the ants out? Well, not because of the ants, but because the ants carry the aphids, right? But we do very little pest control. My pest control budget is, I don't know, maybe $100 or $200 a year. You ask a farmer in the Central Valley or many places in the world, that is a primary source of their expenditures, you know.
Yeah.
So, does that help?
Certainly, that's great.
Okay.
Could you talk about fruit, like cherries and apples that get the...
Sure. And I can ask somebody to check in on Lucette because I don't want her to actually try that Coke and potato chip experiment.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Or any of her friends online here, maybe call her in a week or so to make sure she's okay, you know. Well, I'm an orchardist originally, I did not start it as a row crop grower. I grow annual crops because they pay the bills. And you need to, they provide more immediate income. Orchard crops provide longer term income. So yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with perennial crops, it's a slightly different situation, but the same principles apply. You have to provide the best possible soil conditions. You want to know what that plant likes, where did it come from? And you want to try to create those conditions that it likes, okay? And, you know, we do very little. I think the biggest pest control we do on orchards, for example, is, as I mentioned, I keep the ants out of the trees through very simple strategy, exclusion. Maybe you're in a situation you have to keep the birds out of the trees, exclusion, netting, okay? You know, we do some foliar feeding of perennial crops. Longer term crops, we use a seaweed concentrate, and we apply some every so often, maybe once a month, a little bit of foliar feeding to their leaves, which fills in the micronutrient gaps and gives them a little immune system boost, okay? It's like taking vitamins, okay? Very simple. And we watch and we wait, because sometimes the conditions are just not great. And it doesn't really matter what you do, you're fighting uphill. You've planted something that is not being supported conditionally. And unless the conditions change, it's going to struggle. Let it go. You know, you need to have enough diversity that you always know that something is there and something will not. Every year is going to be different. So the diversity is a protection, okay? Let's give somebody else a chance. Thank you, Lucette.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh my gosh, I think I've...
Debbie Bartman had a question. Do you want to ask your own question, Debbie?
There you are, Debbie. I
Hi.
can see you.
Yeah, my question was, when you had all those orchard trees in boxes, did they stay in boxes?
Yes, they still are. I just was visiting them today. Yes. So everybody said it was impossible. It would never work. Like I said, there's some of those trees that are more than 20 feet tall, full-size trees. We prune more radically and more vigorously in order to create some sort of balance between root system and top. We have to be conscientious about, you know, giving them lots of good treats, compost and et cetera. Yeah, it's, you know, it works. I mean, they're they're still growing, still producing. So, yeah.
Have you grown fig trees in boxes?
Yeah, we have about probably 50 full-size fig trees in boxes with trunks that are like that, you know.
And your boxes are 4 feet by 4 feet?
The boxes are, we have two different boxes we use. We have our veggie box, which was that shallower one. And then we have our taller orchard box, which I showed pictures of, yeah. And they're, the box, the dimensions are the size of a shipping pallet. The depth is what's different on the two different boxes. And I can't remember exactly what it is. You know, so.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome, yeah. I know.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, people were really, at the point when we planted that orchard, there was a sense that I had really lost it because, and the people who some of our funders were very concerned because not only did we plant that orchard in boxes, but we planted things like persimmons, which, you know, that's a tropical crop, you know, subtropical crop. And those two have been quite successful. You know, while at the beginning, I tried to express great assurance and confidence, I was not, but it's worked. You got to remember that agriculture and gardening and food production are the culmination of 7,000 years of trial and error. And if you're not willing to continue to experiment and make mistakes, then you're really missing all the fun and you're not going to move this thing forward. You know, gardens in many ways are the incubators for farms. That's where the great discoveries can be made because there's an intimacy with the scale. A gardener can see a lot more than farmers sometimes see, you know, because of that intimacy, that scale, you know. But you really need to be willing to get rid of all the preconceptions and everything you've read or heard that you have to or don't have to, and do the opposite. Try everything. Be experimental. And when if this book ever comes out, which who knows, then you can hear my radical ideas on how to apply what I've learned in farming to home food gardens. I don't know, will anybody be interested in that book? Is this a bad idea?
Absolutely. Are you kidding? You know they will.
Oh, I don't know. I know.
Gosh,
Okay.
really? Oh, it will be a major revelation to people because your approach just integrates so much of, well, your whole experience. So yeah, and a lot of what you're saying, because you probably said it a few times or more, you don't realize how much it means to people, especially that observation piece and that experimental piece. So when you tell people this, you're giving them a real boost in confidence, for one thing. Yeah, it's great, Michael. It's going to be an incredible book, and I'm going to really, I'll pre-order 100 right now.
Okay, I want a letter.
You got it. Hey, Judy Malik, Judy, do you want to unmute, or do you want me to ask your question? Oh yes, Janet is saying, please write and publish the book, Michael. We need this information and your critical messages. So
Thank you.
Judy Malik is asking, Judy, are you there?
Yeah, okay. Am I here?
Good. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
You go
I
ahead.
just wanted to know about your composting and whether you're mulching, and are you making your compost on site? Do you bring in extra? Because you didn't show any of that. So
Yeah, that's good. Well, okay, so I understand that I live in two worlds. I have our rural farm project at Foxville Farm on Salt Spring Island. Of course, we make huge volumes of compost there, but I didn't show you any of that. But that is, obviously when farming on an island, you have to think like an island. And as such, and in fact, I would suggest that it's a good principle that every farm or garden should consider themselves an island, and to consider their farm or garden as a self-sustaining ecosystem unto itself, thereby forcing yourself to generate as much of that, as much inputs as possible on site, to limit how much you're bringing in. Now, soul food was an exception for many reasons, for not the least of which the city of Vancouver would not allow us to compost initially. We are doing it, and we have been for a number of years. Shh, don't tell anybody now. And in fact, we got funded to purchase a self-contained commercial scale barrel composter that allows us. So we're doing both now. We're doing a self-contained unit, which the city loves, because somehow there's this idea that compost is somehow going to attract rodents and contaminate the city of Vancouver. I do understand it to some degree, but so initially, no. Now, yes. But with that said, due to the volume that we're producing, we still have not caught up to producing enough compost for the amount of food that we're actually harvesting. However, I'll qualify that now and say we are now going to stop using compost for the next couple of years. That sounds radical. The reason is that our organic matter content is just insanely high. It's like 20-some%. And in fact, there's no question that people will think this is completely blasphemy here to say this, but there are times when use of compost can be excessive. And that I saw farms in the States that had problems as a result and had to back off. Okay. It doesn't mean that you do not continue to monitor the fertility needs of your farm or garden. But there are times when, especially there was a pest issue called symphylems on primarily and exclusively on long-term organic farms in California, that was the result of too much compost use. Okay, if you can believe it. And some of the radical agronomists actually advised me when I was down there to back off for a couple of years. It's interesting. Cover cropping, no, we continue to be believers in that. So now we are making a substantial amount at Soul Food. But starting next year, we're going to actually start using less for a period. We're going to give those beds a break for a while. I hope that helps. We tried to, we were going to set up a commercial composting operation in Vancouver to actually be able to produce for ourselves and sell a little bit. And the city shut that down and shut any possibility that we would ever compost on any scale. So we've kind of been underground, but we're doing it. Thanks, Judy. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Judy. I mean, I'm pretty deflated after hearing that because I'm a much better composter than I am a gardener. It's way easier to make compost. But Eric is asking a question and he doesn't have a microphone, Michael,
Okay.
so he wants me to ask you. He says you talked about custom movable boxes and soil biology, but if you had 1 or 2 tips for starting a similar urban farm journey, similar to Soul Foods, what would those tips be?
I love it. Well, first of all, they would be as shameless as I ever am. And the 2 tips would be buy 2 books. Actually, there are 2 books, which I should mention. Which actually will go way more in depth than anything we would ever have time for now. One was the first book I wrote about soul food called Street Farm, Growing Food Jobs and Hope on the Urban Frontier, which was kind of the spiritual story of soul food, if you will. I shouldn't use that term, I suppose, but it is. It's about the people and why we did it and the struggles with the city. It's great storytelling. And that's still available. So I would get that because that gives you kind of the foundation for the piece. And I think that's important. And then, who are they? New Society published a little handbook called Farm the City that I wrote, which goes into some of the nuts and bolts on an introductory level. I had originally written that book in great depth, very complex, complicated, and everybody was like, no one wants to hear about this, 30 pages of crop rotation discussion. So we backed way off and now it's the other extreme. But it's really good if you want great introductory material on how to do this in terms of nuts and bolts. It's called Farm the City. It's got some of my basic principles and the basic how-to of how we physically did it, And I would really, it sounds like I'm copping out here from your question, but I think it's a better answer. And actually you can get more in depth, and neither of those books cost very much. So go for it. And it benefits the organization, by the way. So, yeah.
There you go, Eric. I think that's a fabulous answer, actually.
Eric's probably not happy with me right now.
No, well, I've looked at those books and I agree that will answer every question possible. Okay, we have a question from Alyssa Dawn. Alyssa, do you want to unmute and ask Michael yourself? And then a question from Lee, and then a question from Robin. So Alyssa, are you able to, there she is.
I am. Hello.
Hey,
How's it
where are
going?
you?
I'm right.
She's
I don't
somewhere.
have my camera. I don't have my camera going.
Okay, that's okay. That's all right.
So with the fruit trees grown in boxes, I get the good pruning on the top. Do you guys do any root pruning to keep like the water retention going and keeping them from getting root bound, or does that sort itself out with other pruning?
That's a great question. I love that. Yeah, so it's really interesting because the boxes naturally root prune the trees. So once those roots hit the walls of the boxes, that's it. And so I just have to be conscientious to keep a little bit of balance between the tops and the roots,
Yeah.
And I think it would be beneficial to actually be able to get under there and actually physically root prune, but it'd be physically impossible to try to do. And yeah, great question. And they seem to do it themselves.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I guess they would if the box would act like a bumper.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, you come see it sometimes. It's impressive. it's almost hard to believe that it works. And so, you know, once again, I was saved by some sort of miracle, you know.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome, Alyssa. Yeah.
Thank you, Alyssa. Do you do tours of soul food, and also do you do tours of Fox Farm when things get back to normal?
We definitely do tours of both. And, you know, Foxglove Farm is an awesome way. I mean, this is great. I'm loving being with you all. But if you really want to make an incredible afternoon, you book a tour, and then we have this time together there. And boy, we can get into stuff in person that's wonderful. And I'm hoping that by midsummer things will allow that to happen. And yeah, you can look at our website, which probably needs to be updated. Gives you a few ideas of what it looks like. And certainly maybe that's something Lucretia, I'm sure she's got enough to do, but if she ever wanted to organize something like that, we would consider it. We have a busy summer. Okay, good.
Say it again. You have a big summer?
Well, it's a busy summer, but we love doing those kinds of things where I don't have to go out and people come to us. So that's certainly easier for me at times. Yeah. So.
Okay, you're on. We'll do that. Lee, can you unmute and ask your question of Michael?
Am I on?
You're on, Dave.
Okay, this is great listening to you. Something you said earlier about toxicity of urban soils got me imagining cities as the bubbles of pollution that don't stop at city limits. So it's not a yes or no, it's a how much and how big. And so, you know, you made me think about, like, Vancouver was a bubble, Harriet Bay is a bubble, North America is a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say about that, about toxicity at a distance?
Yeah. Well, look, in my third year of moving to Canada, to British Columbia, as a new resident of this wonderful country, that was a long time ago, I don't know if it was a mistake, but it's a strange thing to do when you're a newcomer to a country that's economy was based on resource extraction. I took on the Crofton Pulp and Paper Mill, which was proposing to start burning tires, railroad ties, and coal to power the mill. And I thought that was so outrageous, I had to do something. And we got Neil Young and the Bare Naked Ladies and a bunch of bands, and we raised a bunch of money and stopped them. But in the process, I learned an awful lot about air pollution and how it travels, and deposition, and the models that exist to actually determine where the concentrations end up. It's surprising, you know, the Crofton Mill, for example, the deposition of pollution, and it is a highly polluting facility, do not necessarily land where you'd think, which is right around the mill. You know, they travel, you know, and what you do is you measure wind speeds and dominant wind directions, and you take all this data and plug it in. It tells you where you might, and then you go test for those concentrations in those areas. This was actually a system, believe it or not, developed by somebody I met who worked with Erin Brockovich. Do you know about the Erin Brockovich story, the movie, you know? And she worked with, and they developed this, what they call modeling, air pollution modeling, to determine where the highest, and they relate these concentrations to the health patterns in those neighborhoods. And then they came up with a strong case. Well, we were able to use some of that data. So I can't really answer the question entirely, because it depends on the region and what's being, what's spewing out of the industrial facilities, what the wind directions are, if there are high winds, if you're next to the ocean.
And water too.
What's that?
Water too.
Water too, exactly, water too. And so I think,
and transportation.
Yeah.
You know, everything.
Everything. I mean, you know, it's, we're living in some interesting and very challenging times. And I think that if you get yourself, you have to be careful, because you have to maintain some inkling of hope to go on every day, to get out of bed. And being gardeners is such a wonderful way to keep yourself sane in this crazy world that we live in. And gardening is also wonderful, not just about your own sanity, but it's about, it's a contribution in my view to, but I wish I could tell you exactly what existed in your neighborhood, but I can't do that. I don't know, so where are you anyway, Lee?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're on Quadra Island.
You're on Quadra. Okay. Yeah.
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 And what, just kind of an example of this is that when the hydro guy came a few years ago to test our power pole, when he got out of his truck, he said, I guess you're not going to want any chemical treatment on this pole that close to that garden, are you? And I said, no, we're not. It's stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome that he actually even asked, because usually, historically, you wouldn't have a choice, or they wouldn't ask, or they just do it. So maybe that's a step in the right direction, but we got a lot of steps.
Well, it also indicates that our neighbor phoned me that he was coming and that I should be there and see if he asked me that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lee. That's great. Robin, you have a question, one last question to Michael. Did you want to ask that? Are you still with us there?
Michael, I was wondering if you produce and sell veggie seeds that are drought hardy, sort of keeping in that mindset of the dry farming techniques and whatnot.
We don't actually, it's an interesting question. And, most market farmers do not actually save seeds. Now, there are many exceptions to that, all our own potato seed and some of our squash seed and there's probably 10 things or so that we save. But because you have to allow that crop to go to full cycle, which in other words, flower and go to seed, which ties up field space and means you have either a little corner of a field that's you're waiting for. We don't have the luxury, and it's a different hat to wear. I am so thankful to my brethren who are producing seed and some of the companies we rely on who have done a remarkable job of allowing us to do what we do best, and who are offering cultivars that are just brilliant and reliability that's brilliant. So I'm very thankful for that, but we're not actually doing that or offering that. I will say that, and just make sure it's clear, that in order to achieve the results that I described through dry farming techniques, the seed is very important and the choice of cultivar, but so is the specific techniques in actually enhancing that plant's ability to survive and produce well without water or with less water. And that will be, by the way, a feature of that. That's one of every chapter in the book is focused on a food type, tomatoes and et cetera, and then melons. And so that is in the tomato section. In fact, I get into that that was the sample chapter that was written for the publishers. So stand by, you hang on for a year or so and it'll be there.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for that question, Robin. Well, we're coming up to the hour, Michael. I'll just make a quick announcement or two, and then I'm going to let you give us your parting words of wisdom as we move forward. Just reminding everybody that Gabbing About Gardening is based purely on donations. Please, if you've received something special today, please consider giving a gift back. We're always free, no matter what. But if you would like to contribute, we are grateful. Next week, we have Lee Gass, and he's presenting, well, I should say Professor Lee Gass, presenting his presentation, Art in the Garden. Same time, same place, right here on Zoom, 3:30. And tomorrow, the Gabbing About Gardening radio show features Arzina Hamir from Vancouver Island. She's talking about giving us tips on planting squash and carrots. Then we have Brigitte Mars, who's written many books on using herbs medicinally, and she's going to talk about why we need to eat our weeds. Lee Gass will join us also briefly for a little segment on art in the garden. And Lonnie Taylor is going to talk about her plant experience when she went to Haida Gwaii recently. She had a mystical plant experience. She'll share that with us tomorrow. Gabbing About Gardening is on Cortez Radio 89.5 from 11:30 to 12:30. And you can also catch it on our podcast, which I post on our Facebook page. Michael, I feel tremendously inspired, except for that compost comment, and I'll get over it. And we want to hear your parting words of wisdom as we move forward and go out into our gardens.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's been very nice to be with you all, and I think I've probably said as much as I can. I just want to, again, just let me reiterate that the importance of what you do in your gardens to the world as a whole. And I'll just say that, I've always preached, and now I'm, that I look forward to the day when gardeners put farmers out of business by growing for themselves. And the reason I say that is that I think every foundational, fundamental problem in the food system traces back to one thing. It's not what we think. It's not pesticides or herbicides or genetic GMOs or any of that. It's the fact that so few people are growing food for so many. And in order to do that, for 1.5 or 2% of the population to feed the rest, they have had to rely on some pretty nasty industrial methods that have gotten us into trouble. So by shifting that, and by more people doing this for themselves and for their neighborhoods, you are solving a range of complex problems. It's powerful work, it's beautiful work, it's inspiring, it's good for your health, it's good for your neighborhood. And so I look forward to visiting you again. Actually, maybe when this thing re-emerges or emerges, we can get together again and have another conversation, or maybe you'll come out and see us at Foxglove Farm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And yes, to all of the above. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Now go outside and get dirty.
All the best.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Oh, I think Michael's left, but I know he felt the love. Thank you for joining us, everybody.